Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another edition of Encounters here on the Akal channel. Today I'm joined by a very special guest. Her name is Rani Bilku. She's the founder of GINA, a women's rights and protection and advocacy group which specializes in abuse, primarily of the Asian community and BME in general, and any lady, no lady is turned away. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Rani Bilku. I've attempted to introduce you as best I can. If there's anything I've missed, if there's something you'd like people to know before we have a conversation about who you are, what you represent, have I represented you correctly? I
am the founder of GINA. We actually don't turn away anyone, so regardless of whichever gender, whichever sexuality, whichever faith group or non-faith group you belong to, we are local, national and international when it comes to all cases of abuse. So there's no, by definition, it's basically anyone and everyone who feel that they're being abused.
That's an important distinction as well. Yeah, thank you for making that. So GINA helps all genders and all sexualities facing abuse, primarily the Asian community. Well,
our referral rate and people that we're actually helping, we're finding out that most of them are actually Asian. So whether they come from the Sikh, Muslim or Hindu faith, but they are primarily Asian. And that is because I think whatever we're doing it well, and women are going back, or men are going back to their friends and family and telling them you need to go and see them. So I think that's probably why our referral rate is quite high, evidently through our, the work that we are doing, and we're obviously having an impact on that work.
So it's not a question of there being a higher rate of abuse or mistreatment in Asian communities as opposed to others?
I think I do feel that there's issues within the Asian community. If we stick to the Sikh Punjabi community for the sake of this conversation, within our community, the concept of izzat and honour and sadi besti ho janiya, if we say anything, is paramount, because it's unwittingly women are the holders of this sort of faith, this izzat and everything, and men are the protectors, and a lot of women, when there is abuse, and they don't define what abuse could be. So when we're looking at domestic violence per se, domestic violence is sexual, is financial, is psychological, and manipulation and coercion, and physical. Now when we're looking at manipulation and coercion, it is actually a criminal offence now since December 2015 that you can be criminalised as legislation. Now if we then define that further, I've been to weddings, say, where within our community, within Sikh community particularly, we like to have a party. We have the Nand Garage, which is the wedding, but the build-up before that, you have the reception, you have the karai charniya, maiya karnaya. There's so many different traditions. And I've been to weddings where, if a girl had got married last year or this year, we'd say, why hasn't she come? And they'll say, you know what it's like when they get married and it's up to the mother-in-law or the husband to, ask if she can come. I'm thinking, well, that in itself is inappropriate, because it's almost like manipulation and coercion. Not only she's being isolated per se, or what she can or cannot wear, so that is manipulation and coercion, which is against the law. So in our culture, people don't recognize that as abuse. So it's not just the physical violence, it is actually, what are you doing in terms of isolation? I know we've had many conversations where people are isolated.
With that example though, where does sort of cultural norms and legalities and illegalities begin?
It's very black and white when it comes to legality. It's extremely black and white. If there is abuse, and that's where safeguarding can come in.
I understand abuse. What I mean is, with the example you gave of XYZ hasn't come to the wedding this year because her mother-in-law and they're not that sort of happy for her to engage socially or.
And it might be a genuine reason, they may have other events as well.
But it does happen.
And also it becomes a collective issue within the community that we almost we accept it, and I think that's where we need to.
But isn't that a cultural norm?
That is the cultural norm. We don't want to rock the boat. Actually, just because a girl has got married into a family, the family is supposed to come more together. But I think within our communities, the fact that we're not asking those questions, it almost legitimizes the issue of coercion and manipulation. That's what happens. Many a time women have come to me and they've said that, for example, rape within marriage, particularly in India, isn't recognized. Here in this country it is recognized, but only recently. Very recently. However, within communities, so whatever faith you belong to, people seem to think that if you get married, it is a man's right, whether they want to have consensual relationship or not without asking consent from the woman. It's their right to do so, and women are astounded to say, no, actually, as a woman, if you don't want to, or as a man, as the case may be, Absolutely. If you don't want to, you have the right to say no. But women feel themselves, because that's what's happened in their community, that this is what we do. We have to be passive with men. We have to conform. But no, it is actually, if you don't want to, it is actually against the law. So these are sort of work that we're trying to do within communities, both to men and women, because it's equal. When we're looking at equality, we're looking at gender equality, you've got to have everyone together and singing from the same hymn sheet.
Absolutely, rowing the same direction. With regard to acceptance, even if it's illicit acceptance of cultural norms, parents say, she's in their house now, in quotation marks. So therefore, they're quite passive towards what they know isn't really correct behaviour, even if it is culturally normal to behave that way. How ingrained is that, do you think, in the Punjabi mindset?
I think it's very much ingrained. There is most arguably a north-south divide as well.
In the UK or in Asia?
I think in the UK. I think in the UK there is most arguably a north-south divide. I've seen it myself, with the women that we're meeting, etc. And if a woman or a man, he feels that he wants to challenge these things, they're almost seen as a bad apple. Why are you challenging? This has happened for ages. Then it also goes on to sort of honour-based violence as well. But arguably, I think there is a north-south divide here in the UK. People in Bradford, to people living in the southeast, very different in their makeup of even just the gender divide or the gender, talking. So it's very different. I think it's very different. So I think most girls who are born and brought up in this country, they've got the Western culture, with school, they've thoughtful, they've got critical thinking, they know what they want to do, whether they're career focused or not, whatever their thoughts and minds and aspirations are, they come home and then they have to conform. And no matter how the family itself likes to think that they're quite liberal, at the back of their mind there is still this norm, how they were being brought up and what the culture wants, and also the expectation of that culture is, and what would happen as a result of someone steering off. And I remember growing up, where girls cutting their hair was a massive issue, and going down, having the two plaits and walking down school and then doing their hair was seen as oh, I'm being a bit naughty here. Whereas now you go to any function, you go, you're just within your household, people got their hair cut, it's the norm. So cultures do change, and we have changed to a certain degree. But however, I do feel that the issues of honour-based violence, issues of domestic violence, issues of girls particularly saying that you can go to university, it's brilliant, especially within the Sikh Indian household. Girls and boys are educated, especially girls are educated, and they'll say, you can go to university, however, after university you've got to get married.
That's for boys and girls.
And boys and girls, but particularly for the girls. There is a change, a mind shift, where it's almost recognisable now that they'll say, just get married to whoever you want, or as long as they are from the same faith and the same culture, which is great. So there is a shift. However, there is a significant amount of families and people who are vulnerable, and there's no shift there. And that's what I'm particularly, I think, interested in.
Would you say that's a minority now?
I think it's a significant. I would like to say it's a minority, but I think it's still a majority, because there's subtleties of coercion there. So there's not girls being locked up in their rooms and saying, you're not going to get out until you get married. There's subtleties, as in, we'll pay for your student fees, we'll pay for everything. However, when that girl gets out and it's like, I'll have to get married because my parents have paid for everything.
What would you say to somebody that says that would be, an encouragement, a way of encouraging somebody to, if not respect, then to, embrace a culture that isn't actually the prevalent culture where they live? Because assimilation, you alluded to girls cutting their hair now. Yeah. That's now normal.
Yeah.
But is that normal as in assimilated Asian community normal, or is that a British Asian culture?
I think as coming from the Sikh faith, cutting hair is a no-no, because it's a part of our deal. But however, I think it was, when I was growing up, it was socially accepted that the boys would cut their hair. But however, the girls were lacking behind to say, no, girls can't cut their hair, because if they are, they're sort of, they're a bit bad. So I think there has been assimilation where it's not seen as bad because we've moved on. But there is still a desire, for example, of cutting hair or not being and the idea is about not being sexually overt.
Do you think
that's the issue?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's the actual issue.
Was precipitated by girls having no choice because they were being forced to live a particular way, which was repressive.
Yes.
Knowing that if they were to escape their household, they would not be able to escape a community that had this rigid cultural system. Yeah. Therefore, they were having to leave their community, and they were embraced by the majority community. And then there was a scare of, we're going to lose our girls. They will leave our community and they will live in a multiracial community where they are accepted. And they change their names and they become assimilated and become European Indo-Christianized,
yes.
if for want of a really bad phrase. But to what extent do you think that fear, because it did become a reality, it is a reality that we live in a multiracial, multicultural and interfaith, interracial community now, but back when we're talking late 70s, early 80s, early 90s. So during those decades, do you think that factored in to the culture change and the sea change?
I think it most definitely factored in, but also I think the generations who were born and brought up in the 60s, 70s, we've sort of assimilated a lot of things. However, we feel, well, that's not quite right. Let's also let's get a little bit more liberal. However, what we found, there were some boys particularly who thought, nope, we want to assimilate that because that is what our identity is. But I think the parents that are being brought up now, or who are bringing up the children, are thinking, well, actually, does it really matter if someone's cut their hair? At least she's at home or she's educated. So the rules of education, and particularly, I think, it was the fear of the unknown. So we are an established community here in the UK that no longer exists, but the fears and the concept of the izzat, and I think the girls particularly, where they are still feared that they might go off track. And if we're looking at interfaith marriages, even last year there was issues about interfaith marriages within the Gurdwaras, and it started off about Sikh girls marrying out of faith. Why they're marrying out of faith? We're not going to marry anyone. Well, actually, surely it should apply to both then.
It does. As far as I'm aware, it does apply to both.
I think originally it didn't.
And I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you the genesis of the first wedding that was disrupted. But
prior to the disruption,
it wasn't actually about gender. It was about the faith and what the Anand Karaj actually is.
I think some would argue. Some would argue the fact that it was about the gender issue, and so without telling you any names, but I know I've spoken to Pradhans, the committee members, and they said, well, actually, we're quite scared. And again, going to that scaremongering of, well, look what our girls are doing. So I think it was intentionally because of the girls, but I think then everyone found actually that's gender discrimination with Sikhs, so we're not supposed to be doing anyway. Then there was the issue obviously about the Anand Karaj, is that going to be a particular issue? And some would argue, how is someone who doesn't know Punjabi, doesn't know what Gurmukhi is, doesn't know what Sikhi is, then still, but being born in the Sikh faith, some would argue, well, how is that?
It is not simple.
No, it isn't. It isn't. But that's a whole other discussion.
It is a whole completely different discussion. Just to say that with the Anand Karaj, as far as where it may or may not have begun, to where it has ended with a sort of stalemate with the Sikh Council and the Gurdwara that are affiliated to it, agreeing that Anand Karajas will not be allowed as interfaith Anand Karajas, and there were guidelines that were
but they're not necessarily followed, because
whether they are or not is particular committees and particular Gurdwara that are responsible for implementation of them. But with those, it does boil down to the same fact that what you've just alluded to, that Sikhs who are born into Sikh families, Asian people that are born into Sikh families, and have utilised an Anand Karaj, yet don't understand it themselves. Yes, that's an issue. That's an issue that the Sikh religion must address. But at the moment, we're talking culturally, and we've jumped to religion and the Anand Karaj issue.
But you see, when we're looking at the cultural norms, for example, the concept of izzat, of either cutting your hair or doing certain things which are, some families might think, oh, that's fine, but some families think, oh, we don't do things like this here. But
that transcends religion, no?
I was going to say, religion is used as a...
Not necessarily, because you have Muslim girls who are frowned upon if they wear makeup, if they cut their hair.
But again, religion is used almost as a control. But even though the religion itself is a beautiful religion, and it does not discriminate against gender, but it's used, if that makes any sense.
Misappropriated.
Yes. So that's, and why? Because if you're looking at the Gurdwara committees, if you're looking at, not just Sikhs, but if you're looking at across all faiths, predominantly it's a narrative of men. And they're the ones who are actually telling them this is what needs to be, happening. And for me, I am absolutely, I think, honoured to be here in Great Britain, to be born and brought up in this country, where my views are heard. Where if I do have something that I've got a resolution with someone, a statutory agency, I know there's due process. I know there is transparency. I know if I ring the police today and say I want you here, because something's happening, I know they will be coming. So as a woman, as a Sikh woman, as an Asian woman, I'm very fortunate to be in this country. I'm also fortunate to be born in the Sikh faith, because I know, and I have done so, where I have challenged people within the Gurdwaras, why have you done this, and this is not appropriate, whether they like it or not, because I feel as a Sikh woman, I have a voice. Whether someone wants to listen to that voice, I don't know, but the way I've been brought up, the way, the Shahidis, the Gurus have done, my Bago, I just feel that as a woman, it is my right to actually fight for injustices.
You're empowered.
And I'm empowered. And when we're looking at what gets me up in the morning, it is actually the whole point of injustice, where injustice is being done regardless of who it is. Like Bhai Kanhaiya, he didn't see who were Muslim and who were Sikh. He saw the human race as one. That's how, with Jina, is integral to the values of what Jina is. That I do not want to, and Jina does not want to see anyone be vulnerable due to whatever it may be, and we want to help them.
So you stand alone, trying to address these issues. They are very real issues.
Yeah.
I mean, I may look like I'm playing devil's advocate, but that's all I am doing, playing devil's advocate. With these issues, do you find that the community, I'm going to say victim, but the may or may not be. I say that, I don't mean they're not a victim. I mean they may not want to be considered a victim.
Well, most victims don't realise that they are victims.
Yeah, that's
regardless
what I'm alluding to,
of whichever background they're from.
So, with regard to the ethnicity or the cultural background of the victim themselves, do they or do you feel there's enough support from their own indigenous communities to helping them?
No. Well, first and foremost, victims don't recognise themselves as abused, as they are being abused.
Yeah.
Secondly, they may feel, particularly I think, within the Muslim community, that they may be married to their cousins, so there may be issues of relationships breaking down, etc. Their two sisters might be married to two brothers, so there may be the issues that, I can't do anything because that marriage might break off as well, or he's related to me. But within the Sikh community, sometimes there's complex issues like I've got 4 girls, where am I going to go? It's my fault I haven't given birth to a son, or there might be a disabled son or a disabled child. So a woman or a victim will make excuses for the reason why she is abused. And the other reason that abuse is almost tolerated is because of immigration issues. So people coming from India, and because they're not Pakke, or the fact that they've come and they shouldn't be here, people use that as an excuse to say, I can't leave this person, is because where am I going to go? So there's financial issues. So people may think that it's people who are in situations of that.
Would you think that the person who is not Pakka, who has issues of their own, that they would need their own counselling separately?
They do. I mean, counselling. If you're looking at within the Asian community or Sikh community, as soon as you say counselling, they say, it doesn't happen to us. Yeah. Bereavement counselling. What's that? Depression. What's that? Mental health is an issue. So that's the first issue. They wouldn't even recognise it. Yeah. But particularly with immigration, and they just feel that they have to tolerate this, where they don't. There are so many. There is so much stuff available within the community and within authorities, and if someone isn't Pakka but they're married, there's your human rights where you can say you can still get Pakka and get divorced, but you don't need to tolerate that person in that marriage. What we've also seen is people who've come from abroad and they've got married and the marriage hasn't worked out for whatever reason, and marriages don't work out necessarily for it's just one of those things where that person has been manipulated to go back to India or their countries of origin, and either they're just left there and their passport and everything is torn, or they're actually murdered out there. Yeah. So we've got many cases where women in particular have been what we call outsourced murder.
Yeah,
they're lured to their death. And this is something that
can we touch on this after the break?
Yes.
We are out of time for this portion of the show. I'm not trying to lure anybody away, but I am trying to manipulate you to come back. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a minute. Gosh. Welcome back to Encounters. We're still here with Rani Bilku of Jina. Benji, before the break you were alluding to outsourced murder and serious issues of murder. We have a high profile example of that from Coventry of Sarbjeet Kaur. How many of those do you think occur?
Sajid Hatwell, she was actually, as you said, from Coventry, and she was murdered in 1998. Now, Jagdish Singh, who is her brother, is a very dear friend and a critical friend to Jina. Now, since 1998, you'd think she was the last one that was murdered, but unfortunately she wasn't. First of all, it took almost a decade to get a conviction secure a conviction for the mother-in-law and the husband, but yet we're still waiting for a resolution in India. The perpetrators in India, they're still at large. So there's no conviction, or no one's looking into that. So even the government here aren't looking into that. So, but since then, there's been a number of other murders. Only last year, there was a lady who was murdered out there, Narinder Kaur. She was murdered out there. Again, nobody really bothered with that. So
has there been a body found?
Yes, a body was found in a well.
So she has been murdered.
But where again, the husband was saying, "Oh no, she's run off with someone." So all these things again about demeaning.
Exactly.
Yes, and where they're demeaning women's characters, because that's what they feel, that we can do that because it's just a woman. No value is put on women, and that is crucially what Gina wants to do. Is about the gender inequality, what happens within the community, and it necessarily isn't actually just policed by men. It's the women who are involved with this as well.
Absolutely,
and particularly with Sajid's case, it was her mother-in-law.
I was going to say that we did a show. Focusing on Sajid Kaur. After that show, I was approached by a very respected person in the Sikh community, and he said, "You're doing this show, but she's alive. She lives in Bombay with her new husband." Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there were sightings of her in Bombay, and you're spreading a myth, basically. I didn't know what to say to him. I didn't know what to answer him. All I did say was there were 2 people in prison in the UK. If you know that is true, then you should approach the authorities and they should be released forthwith. After that, there's nothing for me to say. I've presented the facts of the case. That's all I've done.
I think having faith in the judicial system here, I think as I said, that's one of the reasons I'm very proud and I'm very humbled that we are here in the UK. But also having key people and key stakeholders. In this case, it was Clive Driscoll, who thought that there was something, involved in this, and he went all the way to India. And I remember him saying, when I was there, looking for Sajid, what's happened, and they were, the Sikh, the Punjab police were scratching their heads, saying, "Why have you come just for this one woman?" Because there's no value.
You're doing this weekly.
Not weekly, daily. Women are going missing daily. I mean, India is another issue, and that's probably another show.
That's a show.
But here in the UK, what I'm really concerned about is, the domestic violence. We're looking at which we've gone through. The financial abuse, and I'll give you an example of the financial abuse. So most people think of domestic violence between a husband and wife. But it isn't just between a husband and wife. Domestic violence means in a domestic situation in your household. We're getting a lot of referrals for elderly abuse. And that's when people go, "Oh, really? That's really bad." But actually, it's happening when we're looking at financial. So a lot of elderly people who've got pensions, who are widowers, we've known, and we know of women who are widowers, who their children or a child has taken mum to the solicitors and said, "Can you sign here?" Or it's just a will where everything's going to be done all equally, etc. Only then, in this particular family that we're actually supporting, mum's only now we found out actually the whole house has been signed off, and she's got an eviction notice. And not only that, but she was being financially abused. So her pension, etc., was going into her joint account with her son, but she had no access to that money at all. That is financial abuse.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at here, not just here in this country, but also out in India, where there's land, etc., hereditary land, where that's also being signed over, to the children. So there's a massive issue that needs to be addressed. But equally, we as a community really need to recognise, are we sure we're not abusing our elderly as well? Just because we're keeping them in our, suburban households with their garages and the central heating, that is not just about that. Are their needs being met? And what we're finding out, they are not being met. Doors are being shut at 9 o'clock when people are going out, and they're just being left at home, and that's it. So I think there needs to be more acknowledgement within the community, and it's not about just getting them to the Gurdwaras. I mean, what are the Gurdwaras offering? They're a great place, but we need to stimulate them a lot more as well.
They are at the moment just places of worship.
Yeah.
There's very few classes or very few community-based initiatives in any. But saying that, do you think that this is a sort of realization that our cultural family,
the joint family,
the nuclear family, isn't compatible with today's environment when it comes to employment and the way we live?
I don't think the joint family is compatible to the way that we live here in this.
You don't think that's compatible?
No, it isn't, because I think now there's, back home in India, where you lived in one village, everyone ate from the same pot and worked on the same fields. It's no longer like that. Within a household, you can have multiple professions, and there's multiple aspirations. So I think it no longer exists. And also, I think as parents, we need to recognise that no longer are we going to, when we get older, that our children or our boys particularly are going to look after us. I think we need to recognise that, but equally, I think we need to be responsible of what we can do. And if we're looking at austerity measures, the youth services, elderly, age concern, there's so many cuts. And particularly within our community, we're not accessing that anyway.
Yeah, we do shun it.
We just think,
do you think that's a lack of education?
I think that's and also fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
We don't want anyone to come into our family and look what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of abuse victims, particularly the elderly, won't come forward. I mean, to say if a woman or a man was to say, particularly a man, because we've had referrals from men to say they've been abused, if a man or a woman won't come forward and say, my partner is doing that, apart from being a marriage, there's no other relationship, they find that particularly hard. 35 times until a person comes forward to say that, yes, I've been involved. That's the average. Right. That's how long it takes to tell someone, right? So can you imagine if a parent has to tell someone that my son or daughter-in-law is doing this to me, or grandchild is doing this to me? That's devastating for a mother particularly, and more for a father, especially with the macho culture that we have, to say that this is what they're treating me at. They're not going to say anything.
So are we seeing the beginning of the end of the nuclear family in the UK then, do you think, in Asian communities?
I think that sounds almost like a pessimistic view, but I think it is.
Are we going to see more and more Asian octogenarians using the facilities of old people's homes, retirement homes?
I think there is there's most definitely a shift, and that could come from many different reasons, and most of it is because I think there's this lack of thing. If you do live in a home or a retirement home, nobody loves you, or you feel like a failure, but that necessarily doesn't mean that at all. You can still live the life that you want to live. Unfortunately, especially Asian women that are particularly fine, they live through their children. Yeah. They don't have a life of their own. And with the 3 stages of life of a woman, when you're in your parents' house, you're always under his roof, like your dad's roof and your brother's roof, you do as they say. Yeah. When you get married, it's your in-laws and your husband. If you then are unfortunate to become a widower, it'll be your child, your son, or your daughter. So I do feel a woman needs to recognise that she is her own independent woman, and she can stand on her own 2 feet. She doesn't need anyone, especially being in this country. We are economically and more viable here in this country, and we can have a roof over our head, and we've got access to so many services. It's not like the Bind in India, where the family was everything. It was the DWP, it was everything. That's what you got. It was the hospital. Everything was done there. Times have changed, and we have evolved as a community. And for us to play victim and be a victim, I don't think it's a Sikh way.
It's not. I don't think. I was trying to suggest that they would play the victim. I was just suggesting that. I was asking whether you think that we're going to start to utilise retirement homes more and more so. But you know, from within your own, what you've just said, your answer. Do you think that Punjabi women, in particular, or women in general, though, globally, are they sort of brought up to assume that they have not the power they do have?
Yes. They
literally do have the power to be all of the three things you've just said. Those three stages are the three stages of life from beginning to end. And a woman dictates all of that.
Yes. I mean, Guru Nanak poignantly said,
Indeed.
why do we, shun her when she is giving birth to kings?
Yeah.
I think as a community, we need to recognise and value women, but also women themselves need to recognise and value themselves as well. And I mean, if we're looking at birth, we're looking at sex selection, abortion in India, everyone recognises the fact that there is skewed sex figures, particularly in Haryana and Punjab.
Yeah.
But sex selection, abortion and son preference is going on in this country. And you can say, why is that going on in this country? Here we've got money, we've got everything. We're not, we don't need to actually use these ultrasounds and issues of thinking that they want to have boys and not girls, but it's happening. The reason why it's happening is a drip, almost women being groomed. If you have a male heir, your status will be elevated in a community. And that's a shame. Why should a woman's status be elevated in a community because she's given birth to a son?
So with these levels of gendercide, where will we be in 10, 15 years' time?
Well, look at the chaos and the alarming abuse that's happening in Punjab alone, because there's no women left. They're disproportionately. There's only the disproportionate women. There's nothing left. But we need our women. We need women per se to be in politics, to be members of our community, to be in governance, to have all these, and they can do. I know loads of women who are now having an active role within their community, and we're not saying everyone has to be an MP. Right, but we can still be an active role in our gurdwaras, in our schools. So we need to make sure, and it's not just about making sure that you just make the roti all the time and you just run around the kids. You've got to own your own space in life, and you've got to be the captain of the ship. Culturally,
are we not in a place where when a lady makes a statement or states her opinion even, it's either ignored or taken on board but then disregarded?
Yep, I would.
Why is that?
I'd like to suggest that it isn't, but unfortunately I think in reality it is.
Well, it is. If we're honest with ourselves.
But I think if there is enough of us, enough women who are actually beating the same drum, and men,
yeah,
and there are a lot of men that I've met, you for one, and your colleague Gurnam Singh, Jagdish Singh. So there are a lot of men out there who are beating our drum as well. But we will make a difference. If it wasn't for the suffragettes, women here in this country will not be voting.
Yeah.
So I think we need to still keep saying the same thing, being consistent what we're doing and challenging these norms.
Does the UK still have a problem?
Of course.
Culturally?
Yes. Well, you just need to look at the FTSE 100, don't you? And just look at the disproportion. They were saying there were 15% less women are earning 85p to men earning £1. Yeah. So.
But even on a lower level, yeah. FTSE 100,
yeah.
We don't even have Indians in the FTSE 100. We're not going to suggest it's racist, but with regard to every day,
yeah.
women in their domestic lives, UK, British-born,
yes.
Caucasian women.
Well, let's just say, my organisation as Gina, we used to be in a a council-owned building, and unfortunately we had to give that up because it was being abolished and an academy was going to be built. So I was then asked, I sort of looked around, and there was a sports centre which was owned by a local Gurdwara. So I said, oh, could we have that? Yes, we can. So we paid our rent and everything was there. A couple of months later, I had, out of the blue, I had a letter to say, the committee has decided that you need to vacate the premises. I don't understand why.
Eviction notice.
Pardon?
You were evicted?
Yeah. So
by the Gurdwara.
I then asked, I said, I don't understand why. Oh, it's because it's not really a office. And I said, it is an office. Why did you let me move here before then? You know, and it came down to when I pushed them, it was like, so I'll say in Punjabi and I'll say in English. She goes, "Jera tu kaam kardi hai na, sad jaroorat nahi hai." So he said, well, work that you're doing isn't needed in our community. And I said, what work am I doing? Oh, the Dimiyada. So I said, no, I said, first of all, I don't just do women's work, it's everyone. And I said, but what about that work? And he said, you divorce women. At which I replied...
Oh, you encourage divorce?
Oh, no, I divorce women. I don't even encourage it. I divorce women.
Oh, yeah.
At which I replied, I'm not a vakil. Right. And the caretaker, you know, he said, I can't do anything about it, you're not allowed in the building. And he was like shooting the messenger, there's no point in having going in. But I was then told by a committee member that, you know, you have to take your things, otherwise we'll have to send the boys in. Which I said, I didn't even know that the Gurdwara had boys.
Illicit threats.
Illicit threats, and I had to get the police involved. And now this is because, as a woman, and I'd like to think that I'm quite feisty, but I just thought this is ridiculous. And that, if you're looking at what is the matter with our culture, that is what's the matter with our culture. And quite rightly so, you're right. Footsie is another thing about women on boards. What about the women in the committees?
Yeah, just simple as that. You've got to start at the ground level.
Yes.
They're more than langar sewadars.
Yes.
They need to be in a position to give their input.
But also decision making.
Yeah, absolutely.
And be not yes women, but be actually
the beginning would just be to be able to give their opinion on something and for it to be implemented.
Yes.
Even if it's implemented by a man, just enough to just give a slant to something that was okay, but it's not going to be as effective until Benji gives her advice
and
as
I
well.
think that's one of the, I mean, so as a woman who's got you know, girls and boys, and as a parent, I think that's one of the reasons why children are moving away from the Gurdwaras, because there's not enough engagement. And I think we need to make them engaging. We need to make sure that the youth voice is being heard, women's voices are being heard, because ultimately they're not just religious places of worship where we just go and do matatek and that's it. It is a lot more than that, and the spiritual side of it, but it is actually a community centre. And I think we have all these lavish buildings, but they're not utilised as they should be.
So basically we're only operating on a fraction of our potential.
Yes.
And what we've been given by our gurus.
Yes.
And we should be more, so there is a silver lining. What would you give as we're running out of time, we're almost at the end, but as a parting gift to our audience, to the Sangat at home, what would you say to them to help them empower themselves, to help empower their community?
I think obviously get in touch with ourselves. Our website is gina.org.uk, and I think start having that difficult conversation with your children, with the community, and challenging these things. Before I forget, the reason why I did want to come as well with the Gina suitcases that we give. So the Gina suitcases where we get donated, so we have a new duvet, new pillowcases, etc. We give those to victims who have left everything behind, just to give them dignity and just to give to them. So if anyone wants to donate anything like that, and also baby bags, because I don't know whether your viewers or you yourself know, but there's an increase in domestic violence, particularly if the woman is expecting their second or third child, who happens to be a girl. We've known Sikh women left in hospitals because they've had girls. And these suitcases, the baby bags, they're just there to help them, you know, and give them a bit of dignity. It's an emergency kit for them. So if there's anyone that wants to help and donate, please do so. But again, if there's anyone that you feel, or you yourself feel that you are a victim and you're in immediate danger, ring 999. If not, get in touch with us, or go Google, have a look at any women's aid organisations, but please talk to someone. And young people, talk to your teachers, talk to any appropriate adult. Being silent isn't the answer.
Absolutely. Benji, I appreciate you coming on today. It's been a subject that I hope I've been able to help you explain better to those at home. I'm pretty clueless when it comes to women's issues. I am trying to address those.
But I think the fact that you're giving this platform, and the Girl Channel is giving this platform, which, you know, I think is so valuable, because it's going to people's homes. And I think that's the most important thing that we can actually do, and planting that seed.
Thank you, Benji. I appreciate you coming on. That's all for this week, Encounters. We have tried to give a platform. We are trying to get into your homes, but with certain subjects, and this one in particular, we'd really love to get into your hearts. That's all it is for Encounters this week. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Join us again next week. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.